Unity VR development for beginners. So in this tutorial, we have three main steps. First, we're gonna learn how to set up your project from scratch. And then we will learn about the input system, about how to use your triggers on your controllers, or how to use your hands and the pinch interactions. And then we're gonna learn about the XR interaction toolkits and the prefabs comes with it, like socket interactions, etc, etc. So without any further ado, let's continue. So before we start setting up your project, I want you to take a screenshot of this, because trust me, you're gonna forget at least one of these things if you're new to this. I know it looks pretty lengthy, but it's pretty simple. First, let's open Unity Hub and create a new project. Now select Universal Render Pipeline for this and then name your project. I'm gonna name it Tutorial and then click Create Project. And there we have a new project. So the first thing we're gonna do is click File and then change our build settings. Now click Android and then change the texture compression to ASTC and then click Switch Platform. Now we're gonna configure our player settings. Now click the player settings and then in the Android tab scroll down and remove OpenGLS3. And then change the minimum API level to Android 10 and scripting back into IL2CPP, and then change the target architecture to ARM64. So to build VR apps in Unity, we need a plugin, and install XR plugin management for this. So before we select an SDK, we need to learn about the two most popular SDKs right now. One is OpenXR, where we're going to use XR toolkit, and the other is Meta all-in-one SDK provided by the Meta. So the thing is, with OpenXR, you can build apps for multiple VR headsets, but with Meta, you can only build apps for MetaQuest headsets. So we will select OpenXR for the plugin providers. Now we get these errors because we haven't selected the VR headsets that we want to build this app for. So select the VR headsets from the list that you want to build for. I'm going to select MetaQuest headsets. So after you select the headsets, if it's MetaQuest headset, you have to enable MetaQuest support, okay? Now click Project Validation and click Fix All to fix all the errors. So it should probably fix everything, and you might have one error left about the space ambient occlusion. Don't worry about it. And now close the project settings, and I'm gonna import this free asset from the asset store just so that it doesn't look visually bland. You don't have to do it, or if you want to, I'll give the link in the description. So we don't need a main camera for this because we're gonna use a VR camera. And if you come here in the asset and search for XR, you don't find anything about it. So what we're gonna do is click Window and then Package Manager, and in the Unity registry, change it to Unity registry and search for XR Interaction Toolkit. Now this is provided by the Unity itself. There are many paid toolkits on the asset store, but we're going to use the one provided by the Unity. Now import the starter assets and the hand interaction demo. Now we got an error in the project validation. you just have to click fix it and it will fix automatically. But one thing you must do is click open XR and select hand interaction pose, hand tracking subsystem and meta hand tracking aim, so that you can use your hands instead of controllers. And now come to the assets and now search for XR interaction hand setup. You're gonna find a prefab. Now drag and drop it into the scene wherever you want. So this will be our camera, and if you open it, you have a bunch of prefabs like camera, locomotion systems, controllers, hands, etc, etc. So place this prefab at a position where you want to spawn when you turn on the app in the VR, okay? If you are using a Windows, you can connect your headset using Steam VR or Oculus Link, but if you are a Mac user like me, you have to build it every time, okay? Now open the build settings and select the scene that you're building, and make sure you've connected your headset and hit build and run. Now as you can see, I'm in the environment, I have controllers, but if I try to move, I fall. So this is happening because the XR Origin uses a character controller which has a collider. So the base that we are standing on should also have a collider. So now I'm gonna add mesh colliders for the base, and also anything that I want the player to not pass through. Now as you can see, I can move and I can turn. So for the XR Origin prefab, we have the character controller attached to it, where you can adjust the height or the radius of the collider. So if you open it, we have a main camera and the left controller prefab, right controller prefab, and much more. So for the left controller prefab, the input actions are attached, and inside it we have a poke interactor where you can customize the poke, and then a direct interactor to grab things, where you can also enable this hide controller on select to hide your controllers when you grab something. And then we have a ray interactor to interact with grab or UI, and then a teleportation interactor. And it's also same with the right control, and then we have left hand and right hand, where you can customize the interaction groups. And if you open it, it's the same with the controllers. You have poke interactors, direct interactors, ray interactors. But for this you also have a skeleton of your hand model, like the palm, middle, and etc. It's the same with the right hand too. And the hand visualizer, you can select a material for your hands. Now coming to locomotion system, if you open it, you have turn provider, where you can snap turn or continuously turn, and you can also adjust the angle. If you want to turn continuously, you have to click the left controller and enable smooth turn. Now we have a dynamic move provider, where you can set the speed of the player, and then we have a teleportation provider and a climb provider, which we're going to use further in the tutorial to build teleportation and to climb things. But before that, let's learn how to grab an object. So for that, let's select any object. I'm going to select this vase. Now add a component called XR grab interactable, which automatically adds a rigid body to it. So you can select use dynamic attach or not. Let's see what happens if you don't select it. As you can see, I can grab the object with my controller, but the thing is, it gets grabbed at the same position, and it also passes through the table when I grab it. Now enable the use dynamic attach, and for the movement type select velocity tracking. Now if I grab the object, you can see I can grab it from anywhere I want and it doesn't pass through other objects. So now let's learn how to use trigger. So let me create a new object, cube, and let me resize it. And then I add a XR grab interactable component to it so that I can grab it. So what we're gonna do is we want to change the color of the cube or the material of the cube when I hit the trigger on my controller. So let's write a new script for it. Right click, create new script, and double click to open it in VS Code. Now the first thing you have to write is using Unity engine dot input system, so that we can access all the input system variables in our code. So the first thing I'm gonna reference is a public input action reference variable. So let me name it trigger. Okay, now if you save it and come back to the Unity editor, attach this script to the cube, and as you can see we have a blank option to select an input action reference. And if you click it, you can see we have a bunch of options to choose from. All of these are the inputs you can get from your hands and the controllers. So there are two types of inputs. One can be a boolean for the buttons, and a value for our joystick or the trigger and the position. So vector 3 for the position, 2 for the joystick, and a float for the trigger strength, like how hard you're pressing your trigger. Okay, same goes for the hands. You have the pinch position and float value for how hard you're pinching. Okay, now coming back to the script, let me create two variables for the materials, one for the new material and another for the old material. Now let's write an if statement in the update function. So for the condition, write trigger.action and you can find a bunch of functions. So we're gonna use is pressed. So this tells us whether the trigger is being pressed or not. You'll get a boolean is either true or false. So if it's true, we're gonna change the material of the component. So let's get the component renderer and change its material to the new material. If it's false, we're gonna use a else statement and get the renderer component, change the material to the old material. Now hit save and the script gets updated, and for the input I'm gonna select right hand interaction select, which is the grip button of the right hand controller. Now drag and drop the respective materials. I've just created a green material and a gray material. As you can see, when I grab the cube, it changes color to green, and when I leave it, it changes back to the old color. And when I use my hands, as you can see, when I pinch, the color changes. It's because the right hand interaction select value is also same input for the pinch value. Okay, we've learned how to use a boolean value. Now let's learn how to use a float value. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, based on the distance between our two hands, we're gonna change the color of the cube. So let me create a new script for it. As always, the first thing you're gonna do is make sure you don't forget to write unityengine.input system, and then I'm gonna reference two input references, one for the left hand position, one for the right hand position, and a float variable for the distance between them, and the material for the new material, and the material for the old material. Now we use vector3.distance to update the distance, and we can get the position of the left hand by lPosition.action.readValue vector3, which gives the vector3 value of our left hand position, and do the same with the right hand position, rPosition.action.readValue vector3, which gives the vector3 value of our right hand's position. Now if the distance is greater than 0.5 f, I'm gonna change the material to the new material, or else I'm gonna change it to the old material. Now add the script to the cube and add the respective materials. So for the inputs, if you click it and search for left, you can see an input called left hand's position. Now that's the input which gives the vector3 value of the left hand. So for the right hand, I'm gonna select right hand's position. And now as you can see, when I bring them close, it changes back to the same color, and I move them apart, it changes to green. Now instead of the controllers, let's use some hand prefabs. Okay, now click the left controller and in search box search for left hand, and you can see a left hand prefab. Now drag and drop it into the left controller and do the same with the right hand. Search for right hand and drag and drop the right hand prefab into the right controller. Now as you can see in the scene, we have two hand prefabs. Now change their orientation and adjust them. Now the poke filters are still visible, so what we're gonna do is select the poke interactor and remove all the mesh renderers belongs to it. And for the controller, if you click the left controller and scroll down, you can see model prefab and select it to none, and do the same with the right controller. Now this removes the white controller prefabs that we were seeing earlier, and now these will get replaced with the hands, as you can see. Now let's learn how to build a VR gun. Here I have a cube and I'm gonna build a gun with it. Now create an empty object inside the gun and name it spawn point. Now the position of this spawn point will be the position where our objects will be instantiated. Okay, so place this right in front of the gun. Now in the script, we're gonna get this position, instantiate the object, and we're gonna just add the force to it. Let me just create a new sphere and add a material to it. Now if I add an XR grab interactable component to my gun, as you can see in the interaction events, I have an event called activate. Now let's come back to the script. Here let me create a public game object for the prefab, and a transform for the spawn point, and a float value for the bullet speed, and let me just give 20f. Now create a public function called shoot, and in the function instantiate the bullet at the position of the spawn point. and then add force to it. Now attach the script to the gun and then place the spear in the prefab and the spawn point in the spawn transform. Now add the script to the activate interaction window and select the shoot function. As you can see, I can grab my gun, and while grabbing it, if I press the trigger, I can shoot bullets. Now let's learn how to build a socket. Now let me just add a cube and resize it. Now this will be our stage, okay? So when I put any object on top of it, a socket should appear and our object should snap to it. Now let me add an empty object for this cube as a child and name it socket. Now add a spear collider for this empty object and also enable ease trigger. So this collider is what interacts with the object and enables the socket. Now adjust this collider according to your needs. And now we will add a script to the socket called XR socket interactor. As you can see, we have a hover mesh material. So create a new material and add it to the hover material. So the can't hover material is red by default, okay? And now as you can see, when I move it closer, the socket appears, and when I leave it, it snaps to the socket. Now let's say, how do we do something when the socket is enabled? Okay, let's say I want to change the color of the cube when the object is snapped. Okay, let me just create a new script that just changes the color of the object. Here I reference two materials and create two public functions called socket active and socket deactivated. So in the active, I change the material to new material. So when the socket is deactivated, I'll change the material to the old material. Now attach the script to the cube, and if you see in the XR socket interactor script, we have interaction events called hover and select. So in the select, we have two more events called select entered, select exited. So select entered is when the object gets snapped to it. So select the socket activate function. So in the select exit, select the socket deactivated function. And now as you can see, I can snap my object and the cube turns to green. And when I remove it, it turns back. But there's a problem with the XR socket interactor script. That is, let me show you. So I'll take a random object and add XR grab interactable script to it. And as you can see, the new object is also getting interacted with the socket, and the old object is also interacting with the socket. So the problem is any object can interact with the socket. We can't differentiate them. So to differentiate them or to prioritize them, we can do one thing with layers. So select XR socket interactor and add a layer called socket. Now select the object you want to interact with the socket and open its XR grab interactable layers, and in that select socket including the default layer. Okay, and the objects that you don't want to interact have only default layer selected. Now as you can see, the VAS gets interacted with the socket, but the other object can't. Because it doesn't contain the socket layer, it has only default layer. But this thing has both default and socket layer, which is essential for our socket interaction. And now let's learn how to climb. So in the assets, search for climb, and you can find a prefab called climb sample. Now drag and drop it into the scene. And as you can see, it has three objects. One is the ladder, and the other one is teleportation area, and the other is climb wall. So we can now concentrate only on the ladder for the time being. So if you open the ladder, you can see there are multiple cylinders, and all of them has a capsule collider. And so these cylinders are meant to be climbed, okay? So all of these cylinders has a parent, and that parent has the script called climb interactable script. Now in the climb settings override, if you change it to value, you can restrict the movement of the player in any axis. So if you want the player to move only in upwards, you can only enable the Y direction, okay? So for the top two handles, you have to enable the Z direction so that you can move front when you reach the top. And it's also same with the climb wall, okay? As you can see, there are a bunch of spheres with sphere colliders, and all of them has a parent which has a climb interactable script attached to it. And now I can climb the ladder. As you can see, I can only move upwards. And if I grab the top two cylinders, I can even move forward, and I can reach the top. Now let's learn how to teleport. As we've seen earlier, in the XR origin we have a teleportation provider, and in there you have delay time, where you can delay the time of the teleportation. And now if I want to teleport in this area, what I'm gonna do is select that object and add teleportation area. And now change the layer mask to teleport only. Remove the default and change it to only teleport. Now I can teleport to anywhere in this particular area, okay? As you can see, I can teleport in this area, but I can't here. I can teleport here, here, but I can't here. Now let's learn how to use a button. In the assets, search for push button and drag and drop it into the scene. So what I want to do is I want to delete an object when I push the button, okay? So let me just create a script for it. Now the script is really simple. I'm gonna just reference a prefab and then create a public function to delete that prefab, okay? And I'll just name the function poke to destroy. Now add the script to the button and then add the prefab that you want to destroy when you poke the button. And now if you open the XR simple interaction events on the push button, you can see a select event. Now drag and drop the push button in it and select the push to destroy function. And when I push the button, the object gets destroyed. So this is Unity's GitHub example project. It has various types of prefabs like levers, claw machines, dials, wheels, etc. I've already exported them for you. You can just download them from the description and import them to your project, okay? spatial simp exports, you can just drag and drop it into your scene and click import. Now if you open the package, you can see multiple prefabs. Let's learn how to use a lever. Now drag and drop the lever prefab into the scene. Now let me just create a stage for it with a cube. And now I'll add water to the basket so that when I activate the lever, it appears, and when I deactivate it, it disappears. Let me just add a blue material to it. So let's create a script for our lever. So first I'll reference a prefab and then two public functions, one to activate and one to deactivate. Prefab dot set active false and prefab dot set active true. Add script to the lever and select the water as prefab. Now as you can see in the XR lever script, we have two functions, on lever activate, on lever deactivate. So let's create two new events and select the functions that we've referenced in our script. Now as you can see, when I activate it, it appears, and when I deactivate it, it disappears. Let's learn how to use joystick. Let me just duplicate this cube for our joystick. Now drag and drop our joystick into the scene. Now our joystick has a script called XR joystick, which provides a vector2 value, which we're gonna use in our scripts to move objects. Okay, so let me just create a simple object with cube so that we can move it with our joystick. Okay, now let's create a script so that we can move our object with this joystick's vector2 value. So here the most important line you should write is using Unity engine .xr .content .interactions. So this is a must and should line you should use so that you can reference the joystick script in the variable. Okay, so that we can get the value of the vector2. So let me just reference a variable called XR joystick, and I'll just name it joystick, and then a float value for the movement speed. And in the update function, let's update a vector3 value called movement. So the x will be joystick.value. And the y value will be same, and the z value will be the y value of the joystick. And then multiply it with speed and time.delta time, and then just translate the current vector to the new vector. Now attach the script to the cube and drag and drop the joystick's script. And as you can see, I can control the cube with my joystick. Let's learn how to build a door. So first, create an empty object called door, and then I'll add a cube as child and make it as a door, and then I'll add a sphere as a handle. Now add XR grab interactable component to the door body and enable use dynamic attach and velocity tracking. So if I grab the door now, the whole thing moves. We don't want that. So for the door body, let's add a component called hinge joint. As you can see, it's on top, but we want it to be at a natural hinge position of a door, so you can just change it. And for the rotation axis, we only need Y, so X will be 0, Z will be 0, and only Y will be 1. Now this hinge is the base of our door's rotation axis, so now currently it rotates 360. So we need to add limits, so enable use limits and add a minimum value. Okay, now as you can see, I can move the door. Now if you open the project and see you have multiple prefabs, now drag and drop the wheel which has a XR knob script to it. Now if you open the wheel, you can see another child object called wheel, which has a sphere collider. This sphere collider is what actually helps us grabbing the wheel and turning it round. So now as you can see, if I change the value, the actual body of the sphere itself turns. Now let's build a simple functionality. What I want to do is I want to turn a cube with the help of this steering wheel. So let's build a cube and place it right in front so that we can see it turning. Now let's create a new script called wheel and double click to open it in the VS Code. Now in the script, the first thing you should add is using Unity Engine XR content interaction. Now you reference variables for the cube and the XR knob script. And now we have this XR knob value. If you go back and see in the wheel, the XR knob value is from 0 to 1. So I multiply with 360 to get a rotation angle. Now update this y-axis rotation to the object. Now add this script to the cube, and in the place of object, place the cube itself, and for the knob, place the wheel. Now I can turn the steering wheel, and as you can see, the cube also rotates. Now drag and drop the slider into the scene. As you can see, it has a script called XR slider, which has a value ranging from 0 to 1. We're going to use this value to scale our object. The first thing you should write is using Unity Engine XR content interaction. Now set the references for the slider and give some values for the minimum scale and maximum scale. Now update the new scale using a lerp function where you're going to use slider.value as a multiplier. Now transform into the new scale. Now drag and drop the script onto the object you want to scale, and also add the slider to the script. As you can see, the scale of the object changes as I move the slider. And that's it. You've learned the basics of Unity VR development, and now it's time for you to make an app. For any doubts, I'll be available on Discord, so feel free to chat. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.